Dagi Jiso Jivi Sunamji Zala Benji Ruba Shu Sanje Cheta Suji Chana La Chanju Badu Dani Ji Dagi Chijin Jivi Sunamji Zala Nanye Ruba Shu Sanje Cheta Suji Chana La Chanju Badu Dani Jesu Ji Dagi Chijin Jivi Sunamji Bende Sanje Druva Sho Sadan Lame Lamia Jiang Boda Jajin Jajala Chava Japana Sanje Sambara Shijin Duve Tetashi Tame Chenya Din Diriji Jiri Tega Jajin Diriji Soviet Yuga Tambada La Soviet Yuga Dia La Benya Sanja Susa Yimena Ambida Nela Badula Tuve Sonya Jira Namala Yagada Lutan de Jenda Drubuda Dami Yagana Ruba Kunji Tano Chizawa Tamje Gado Dagi Che De Jo Kangite Jawa Jong Gaba Meba Cheba Cheba Meba Dama Bawa Meba Jumeba Tada Tenji Jawa Nishi Shidamba Zoe Sanje Manaje Damba de la Cha Cha Lo Oh Yaso Da Kasore Ni Chanju Sumje Nara 아니 지된 된종 안로에 대담메데 동하다 섬전란이 펜바다 내바체베지 대우송스 섬전된의 상제지 공방라면 예주나 사담미 대와다 창다 안벽하다 아니 마장완에 다시 자송하나 시체니 어디 되니 지오라 조금 천단 동하다 아니 가서 섬전이 비대우송 소하나네 다 알아서 가서래 대화단 밑에와서 대화단 밑에봐도 가래가 되나 총알에서 섬전을 내봐도 편바치베 저도 저울에 되나 숨바래서 와 가서 된다 쉬워나 시체 지된 된종 안조이지 된조당 안조니 된디 대화당 아니 안지 동안이 오데 섬전을 편바당 아니 섬전을 내바치베 저고 섬전을 편바치와라 때네 아니 저고 섬전을 내지 방위现在 시단 제와라 도바기 추dum양라 발려와라 때네 된디리데 토과인장我지된 된종 안조이 대단 밑에 동하다 섬전란이 내바다 편바치베 저고 송스 아니 섬전되네 상제지 섬전라 때네 토자라는 모양다 봐 조회 상제지 공부 토를 쳐봐 그 주디 섬전라 밑에네 제가 섬전라 밑에 인제 비참배 창조그 셈 어더니 다시 순전 연수련 발레들 상제지 공부 토바 인장 섬전되네 상제지 공부라면 예주나 상제지 공부라면 봐 해주나 아니 사당 미 대화당 대다 탐제 아니 섬전게 말랑 와지 치아요 말이 야
Now, as it says in the explanation of bodhicitta, it says that all of the happiness and misery of sentient beings, and particularly the happiness that's experienced in the upper realms of existence, as well as the misery that's experienced in the lower realms of existence, all of that comes about from helping and harming sentient beings. And so what this is referring to then is that whenever we experience any kind of pleasure or happiness, all of that comes about from our help to other sentient beings, benefiting other sentient beings. And on the contrary, all of the misery that we experience ultimately comes about from harming other sentient beings. So that being the case, then then the verse continues by saying that through helping other sentient beings, we can achieve the highest form of happiness, and this includes any kind of pleasure that we would experience in the upper realms of existence, up to and including the supreme bliss of the achievement of unexcelled true perfect awakening. Now, how does that come about? That occurs because it's, as we've mentioned previously, by seeing other sentient beings as dear to us and developing compassion, love and compassion towards them, then we can cultivate, based upon that, the bodhicitta, the aspiration to achieve unexalted, true, perfect awakening for the sake of all sentient beings. And based on, with that motivation, then we can actualize the perfect awakening of Buddhahood. And likewise, by seeing how suffering arises from harming other living beings, we can develop the basic, by recognizing that causality, we can develop our stronger engagement in the ethical conduct, ethical discipline of avoiding the negative forms of behavior that are found in the 10 non-virtues and so forth. And through that, then we can ensure that we avoid all of the sufferings from the lower realms and up, even the coarse forms of, subtler forms of suffering in the upper realms of existence. So it's through seeing other beings as beings that we should help and seeing others as beings that we should not harm that we're able to achieve all of these forms of happiness, from the most basic form of happiness in worldly existence up to and including the achievement of perfect Buddhahood.
Oh yeah, tene samja nyawi dunga da zhong chendang dibadang. Oh, ane dibala so wane ane karel tane chungare sana samja nibi zhou chung, samja le niba chebe zhou song. Ane ta samja nibi zhou, teta pendang meben bi samja le pemba zhubadang. Ane samja le niba cheba ge ane zhou chungwa jeba na. 是这判断没不周就是，在他各级就讲呢，让点全是其他的呢，是我说那些判别周去吧，俺的周去吧来结吧那各级就讲，俺的让可能对我准备去都，这些的那个，这些的那个嘛的，俺的什么叫个团了中国的，中国人吧的。
Then, so the verse continues by saying, when we see that happiness arises from helping others, and our own suffering arises from injuring others, so that we see all sentient beings as these objects, other beings that are objects of, either harming others or helping others, then we should develop based upon that. And we see how even our own aims are achieved through avoiding harming others and, on the contrary, helping others. Then we should think that why would I, for a single moment, harm others or not do what I can to benefit others? So this reversal of focusing on one's own limited objectives, selfish kind of pleasure, and instead turning towards helping others and seeing that in the ultimate outcome that helping others is the best way to help oneself, then the verse asks rhetorically, why would I spend a single moment, stay for even a moment without helping others?
Oh yeah, then that panda me bambi zhou chung xin zha bo na, rang de cha xin qi da ne, se wa na xie chen. Da sem jian le pen ba zhu wa dang, ane ne ba qie ba ge, ane ka so le zhou le jie ba yin na, ane pen de zhu gui wa. Pen de zhu ba la, ane da zuo de, ane pen ba zhu ba ge, se wa nian ji xian bo gu de lang jie gui wa. 这把年纪结巴了，体育宽度，俺那他年轻结果哇，哦，让个听着天天是没那么听啊，没那现实这种，然后年轻结完了，俺那他看着来说呢，俺那他妈，那跨越东岸300多年，他东岸。 这些那个东岸300了，在那跨完了，我就年轻结，年轻结呢，俺那他把他这个那么人把电信没到就入电了，怕呢，我都是前面做过一张，俺那天这位，俺那他，电信，俺那没到把进入电了，把给俺那兄弟，他。 체계 제바 임배 아니 섬제 탐제 토자라나면 뭐 저거 사제죠 고마 토바자 티시도 아미 담비 쉐냐 세냐 그노 꾸지지는 바나 레바다 사다데 아니 삼바라쇼스
Now then, so when we see this, that whatever happiness that we can achieve, either in the present or in the future, up to and including the achievement of Buddhahood, comes about from helping others, then we need to reflect, as we've talked previously, about how the ultimate way to help others is by being able to lead them to freedom from their sufferings and establishing them in highest form of happiness. Only someone who is a Buddha can do that in the perfect and unerring sort of fashion as it's described here in this text. And thus we think that, well, in order to do that, to achieve that state, I have to have developed bodhicitta. In order to have that, I need to have compassion and love for sentient beings. As we've said, the only way to achieve real or the ultimate forms of compassion and love for sentient beings is by understanding their samsara. The only way to understand their samsara is by understanding one's own samsara. And thus we need to understand what is suffering, how does suffering come about, what is the state of being free from suffering, and the path which is the means to achieving that freedom from suffering. So that's the subject matter here in the text that we've been examining. So we're at the point now where we're looking at suffering and its origin, and so then as is typically or usually always the case of listening to teachings and explaining teachings, we need to have the proper motivation and think, thus I'm going to listen to these teachings on the path to, on the Four Noble Truths, and I'm doing that in order to ultimately to achieve unexcelled true perfect awakening, in order to become a perfect guide for all sentient beings. And so we set our motivation at the outset before listening to the teachings.
Oh yeah, adela ane lundo ki kaso lundo shaba tela ane dehi sensi tela ji tuan da yana ku tuan ni ge na ne ane ji tuan da la dehi changye korun ya wa sensi na sensi ngo song wa sa de ma chen ne ane tela 아니 로시 주중에서 대단가에 나바 주중에 송하세지 다 대단가에 나바 주중에 송하지 가도 되라 가상 동화당 군중에 나바데 친처이 바여서지 저와 다 고비 나바데 내려와 고비 나바 아니 다 가려 고바세나 예배도지 동화 댄서비 차와 是吧？空中出没送啊，空中出没送呢？空中的，对，空中，哦呀，空中跟那把，我然后大概我马出写的是，但空中跟那把是空中呢，来到你们你是吧？사바 제외 내다니 사바 제외 내다니 세 대양 아니 다 레세와양 대양 아니 컨숨 도와리로 큰 편제기 껴래 편제기 내당 아니 편제기 내 대기 두제기 내세바 어떻게 어디 아니 귀나 봐 군중을 남바들라 두군중 rab제 계시 예배나네 귀나 봐대 뉴이나 바인데 아니 랑제 동아 제제 그자와 사제니 랑제 동아 사제니 레지 공부데 아 두티 제제 그자와 임바다 그 군주인데 대나바 탐제도 양내양도 깨버려 시시 아니 당제 말이 바 말로 바라던 말로 봐도 아니 가서래 사제니리 풍부 양다양도 깨버셔봐 인장 대나바 탐제바 양다양도 깨버셔 군중기나 바체 아랍지 인데 아니 다 되기 내다니 몽세바 대가게 아니 동아 쇼차보랍도 깨봐 인장 대 랍지 인데 동아 쇼주 제시 임비체래 군중 랍지 내가 깨지나 봐 세대 가래에서나 아니 란데 동하게 년당 현지 체체니 예배나래 현지 체체 제바 인장 되게 깨지나 봐
Now then, so we've gone through the introduction to this section on the Four Noble Truths in general, and specifying the number of the Four Noble Truths and the sequence in which they're presented, the two different ways of doing that, and the one which is the basis for this explanation. And then we've gotten into the identifying 16 distorted kind of ideas, misconceptions about the Four Noble Truths, and then the section on the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths, the actual aspects of them, which are the contraries of the mistaken ideas or distorted ideas. And we've arrived at the aspects of origination, and this is on page 345 of the translation and 219 at the bottom of the Tibetan text. So this says, the aspects of origination, contaminated karma and craving, have the aspect of cause, because they are the root cause of one's resultant sufferings. So these are cause because they are the fundamental or primary cause which gives rise to the effect of suffering. They are the origination of all suffering because they are generated in all their aspects again and again. So these things are origination because they produce over and over again all of the different types of suffering and aspects of suffering. They are strongly arising because they are generated forcefully. That is, they produce their effects in a powerful fashion. Craving for existence has the aspect of condition because it is the cooperative condition of one's own resultant suffering. So within causes, there are sort of primary causes and then there are cooperative causes. So here, this craving for existence is a cooperative condition which causes the result of suffering in one's own experience.
Oh yeah, that is la gobe number day. That you book any cancer, Damon was some to be so come dodgy. Any child to you do I say, answer be Chawa Quato Goresana. Any Yandu on the chairs and a Lame Dachum Toba or Tinagala Togore. You be dodgy do I dance a bit Chawati. Tender Anita Castle, Chocobi number in the Goba, Sevani, Dungapan, Tachitan, or Castle, and Goba said that Madame Aboyo, the Panja Raba, that the Liga Gugom, Tede Dungapan, the Pampatella. Charge you, or Chocobi number in the Dungapan, the Tawa in the Sheriffs. Goba, Godangi number della Goba, Shiva, Tanum, Nishis, only young Chinese see you are but in Zanda will be number in the Dungapan Tawa in Bishop. That tender be any or then the what is Shabak, you be to Dunga Sabak, Lame Pinch, Lamania Daddy. Any Siri number in the Numon Bambi Tawa in Bishop, any Numon Sabara Bamba. Numon, Pachagan, Sapanta, but can be number in the any Pemba than David Taba in Bishop, Pentadrup, Pemba than David Taba in Bishop, China be number. New number in the Anita Lamito Bishop. Do not dance about Lamito Bag, Changing Taba in Bishop. What the and you go be number short.
Then next comes the aspects of cessation, and here there are multiple forms of cessation, different levels of it, but within the Four Noble Truths, it's referring in this context principally to the cessation which is actualized when someone achieves the cessation without any kind of remainder or residue at the state of achieving arhatship without any kind of leftover or residue remainder. And so this cessation then is freedom that is the elimination of the basis of suffering by the force of the antidote. And the antidote here refers specifically to the wisdom that understands selflessness, that realizes selflessness, which is the direct antidote for the misconception of the self, misapprehension of the self, which is the basic cause of samsara. So this has, again, the aspect of cessation because it is a freedom that has abandoned suffering. So there are different forms forms of cessation that are actualized like earlier on the path, where one eliminates some portion of the mental afflictions or in that way. But this is referring specifically to the cessation, which is the utter elimination or separation from mental affliction in its entirety. It has the aspect of peace because it is a freedom that has abandoned defilements. And again, here it's the specific form of peace. There are earlier levels of this, but that are complete pacification of all of the defilements or mental afflictions. It has the aspect of sublimity because it is a liberation that is beneficial and pleasurable. It has the aspect of definite emergence because it is a dharmic liberation that is irreversible, or it's a complete definite emergence. Here refers particularly to that state of achieving the nirvana cessation without any remainder, because there's no reversibility or re-arising of any of the mental afflictions on that level.
Oh yeah, that is lamji nabatela. Lam riba tuba ngeshi lam riba tuba ngeshi that 최신 다진 아시체 단자 두다 단다들라 다 다면 무슨 또 비셔라 의지 가서 다면 무슨 또 아니 셔라 단지 람진 남바스 람진 남바데 인데 타바 줘바기 다면 무슨 또 비셔라데 타바 저저게 람이 가서래 다면 무슨도 또 비셔라데 타바 줘발라 크지 조 당진 말이봐 당진 말이봐 본제게 년보 담도 비셔라 인장 타바 람진 남바 인데 타바 저지 람이 비셔 다 리베 남바 인데 아니 다 가서래 팀원이 쳐비셔 당진 공원이 쳐비셔 년모 공원이 쳐봐 뭐 당진 공원이 쳐봐 Ruby number Yendi, and a seminal tattoo bars, that's a seminal tattoo bars, and those two more will is on those two more in any castle, from their castle, Kasakatamed, Chamode, and it's nearly tattoo, but telelabagi, and it she managed to show me to buy it down. Somebody, and it you don't choose it. I'm a tramasha to go around. What is the Seminal tattoo bangos to be she be said. Tang you watching a number in Bacare, and that do not let me be changed to shape in your be said. Let me be changed and a bongi water, and you will Casata to be children. And it Yambo be said.
Now then, the aspects of the path are the principal thing is the wisdom which directly realizes no self, absence of a self. And here then, we're talking about particularly the level of selflessness which is common to both the Pramanavarttika and the Chittamatra perspectives or views. In this perspective, then the selflessness which is specified is one which is sort of a common basic level of selflessness, the absence of the person being a self-sufficient substance. If one was speaking in terms of the mind-only view, then one would also add to this the view that subject and object are not two substances, or they're empty of being subject and object are empty of being two different substances. But here, this is presented from this common perspective, so the wisdom which realizes selflessness or no self is specifically at that basic level of the person being empty of having a self which is a self-sufficient substance. So this is the path, because it is a path that leads to liberation. This wisdom directly realizing selflessness is the agent which leads to liberation. It has the aspect of reasonableness because it acts as the direct antidote to defilement. So it's the direct antidote to the mental afflictions, and particularly the misapprehension of the self or clinging to a self that doesn't exist. And then it has the aspect of accomplishment because it is the gnosis that perceptually or directly cognizes the ultimate actuality of mind. Here, again, in this context, you have to distinguish whether the presentation is being done from this common perspective of the Sautrantika idea about selflessness or the Chittamatra mind-only school's view of selflessness. But here we have to specify that it's the common notion of selflessness. It has the aspect of definite removal because it is a dharmic antidote that cannot revert to suffering, or that suffering is not. It means it's like a complete eradication of suffering, such that it's an antidote which is the agent that has the property of preventing the reemergence of suffering.
Oh yeah, I think that caso de dugi. The Basho, the horror side, that is sugar, Duguni, number jet over there, and it number of Shung so Chepaston last. Guanam number jet, Shung some so Chena, and a Shung some Chena just a year a day, and you live in Hawan, and you go in about the lunch that when you was a Sumba, Sumbe, and Nabatama, Koniwala Gona, and it was Sarmasumba shadow.
Now, there's that covers then the basic presentation of the Four Noble Truths as well as their 16 aspects. But then there's a kind of side issue here that's presented, which says that the 8 aspects of suffering and origination are taught by individual divisions in the text of the Pramanavarttika. If one wants to make individual divisions of the 8 aspects of cessation and path, it appears that one can do so. But Acharya Devendra Buddhi, one of the commentators on the Pramanavarttika, explains that the aspects of cessation and the aspect of path are taught directly, while the remaining 6 aspects of cessation and path are not directly and explicitly or clearly taught, but they can be understood as basically as being intended or implicit within the discussion that follows.
Oh yeah, that's enough. That's and it about that time yet, Chimmy Command top of Derby, and it over than Denby. That over than Denby, and in Castle Casa, top of the time yet, Chimmy Lamland, Juby, Yala, and you call what you do to sumness. Call Juby Rimba, Maribala, Dene, Lesa, Lady Wangi, and if Lady Paja, and now she didn't shadi, Silangi Sir Dobala, Santani, and Pumbo Tuzuki. And you call you be true down. Mariban Dobe Ledo. Oh, any Ledo by any lady Patana shit to go about it. What Dobe true some and you call Tataki, Yijun de Kovalang, Kavala, Yijun. What about Niju? Quatataki, Yijun de Kovalang, Yijun de, and a Tabatani, Lord Jibi, Tap Shabanas. Tashabana, Shun Dini, Chot to Chushi to Names, or that Shungitinian Chot to Chuade, and Tamanam de Shundere, Shun Dini, Chot to Chushi to Names. Shun de la Tesam Chibi, Senior Tas, Shun de la Tesam Chibi, Senior, Kachida Bashitu Masonwas, Kachida Masomba, Shabata Mayemba. And you call Chi Cheragini, rounding the same thing to Sabacho Kogyo in the Kachida Bashitu Masonwa, Kowachita Cheragini, Leper Samne. Ani Koyutunga Yichun, Yichun, Samne tell a Yichun Chijetans, Okolan, what you will Yichun, Yichun Chijetan, Taba Teniji, Lord Chiche Chakore. Yeah.
Now then, I will explain in brief the methods whereby the intelligent contemplate the details of engaging in samsara and the way of reversing engagement with samsara, how they renounce all of samsara and generate a mind intent on liberation. This text appears to be uniquely important, and those scholars who think about studying this text should not direct their minds only to externals, but should contemplate well the general and particular disadvantages of samsara. And to that extent, there will arise a mind which renounces samsara, a disgust for samsara, and there will arise, to an equal degree, a mind which is intent upon samsara. So when it talks about the way of in which we enter into samsara or engage in samsara, and the way in which we turn away from samsara, reverse our engagement with the samsara, again, the first one refers to the way in which ignorance produces karma, generates karma, and then karma deposits propensities for suffering, for the 5 aggregates which are of the nature of suffering to arise. And that's the basic causality of the arising of samsara, or the production of samsara. And then the way in which we reverse from our engagement from samsara, we remove ourselves from samsara, is by eliminating ignorance, and then that eliminates the activities or karma which deposit those seeds upon the mind stream and then produce suffering. And so by eliminating the basic cause, then the causality that arises out of that is stopped. So those two features, when we think about those, it's not, when we study these things, it's not something that we should just be thinking about as some kind of topic for intellectual curiosity, but rather it's something that that to the extent that we understand it, we should use it to apply to our own samsara, and realizing how the general and particular defects or negative consequences of being in samsara apply to us. And when we do that, then that establishes within us a kind of disgust or revulsion towards samsara, which then again induces to that same degree the mind intent upon liberation, or the an attitude of striving for liberation.
Oh yeah. Anita, oh you mean lebar samne 이중 기계다 타바 되니라 로 타바 되니 로 기계 차스 아 타바 되니 로 제바나 아니 저 가르레서나 다 저거 소와나시 춘에 퇴다 상공바 공발라니 rab도 저 소와나치 전에 저데 아니 주름지 나와요 개체시디 말이 신인 가서다 틈이 지단 미지 사신도 연령군지 시단 레와송 저희가 소와나시 전에 주름지 나와데 연내 탐제집이 시인장 제달 제와나 아니 라바 주름지 나와 라 아니 침발이나 미가지 봉가 주름다 아니 그게 그도 마당 아니 rab도 중화다이나 아니 소다기 도마 밤마르 중고 다게 수롱 그도 마 대다기 와나 라바 주든지 나와 시송서 라바 주든지 나와 이때도 아니 라바 수르 마신도 좋고 와야다 아니 라바 셈이 라바来养其实落当参办的人，年年前呢，甚至老王，俺哋等于是老王参与把，俺哋新年马多把都透过马来的，特马多把都养，俺哋让个甚至那些扛突突去，俺哋他刚说的sem情个当。我那么一个按照马说吧，扛突突的马上，俺那刚说这个年年都7个月的了，他把什么了完了，其实落当参巴的了，年年都钱呢是吧？天天留的下边给俺那他刚说的看啥个大妹，天天留的下边看啥个大妹当。아니 다 루스만에 샤바고 치치다메 루스만에 데베 치치다메 다메데 삼삼베네 좀베 숨지 대신이 좀 치치다메 데다 안테다 아니 레바 때나 파면 공고 그래.
So thus, when those attitudes have arisen, and this is referring specifically specifically to the attitude which is has the discussed renunciation of samsara and the attitude of striving towards the achievement of liberation, then these function, when those have arisen in that way, then those function as the foundation for the training, higher training in ethical discipline. And so the higher training in ethical discipline has as its basis this attitude of renunciation, disgust with samsara, and the wish to achieve liberation. Or even if you go to the most fundamental level, when one is developing the attitude of wishing to become free from gross forms of suffering in the next life, we do that by recognizing their defects and then restraining ourselves from engaging in the 10 kinds of non-virtuous actions which are the causes of those gross forms of suffering in the future. But then if in addition to that, one is engaged in, one can take the vows that are specific to a lay follower, or one can take the monastic vows for monks and nuns, and then one can, those higher vows, the higher training in ethical discipline, all of those have as their foundation this recognition of samsara, its defects, disgust towards those, and then the desire or wish to become free from those. Then that itself serves as a foundation as well. The training, higher training in the ethical discipline serves as a training basis for engaging in training in the it's called the higher training of the mind. It's a term for the development of meditative concentration. Until one actually develops samadhi, or real meditative concentration, one isn't actually training oneself in the higher training of meditative concentration. But even prior to that, to the extent that one's able to the degree that one's able to produce within your own mind a sort of stability and lack of distractibility, to be able to focus your mind even in the ordinary sense, then that's something that one should apply oneself to with as much effort as one's able to produce. And then with that as a foundation, with the stability of mind as a foundation, then one should apply oneself to meditating upon all of the topics which are explained, specifically the training in higher wisdom, which is the explanation of selflessness of the person explained here in this chapter, and then what's explained later within the Pramanavarttika, this text in subsequent chapters, is the selflessness of phenomena, which is the absence of subject and object being two separate substances. You establish those through reasoning, and once you've done that, then you meditate on those, or condition your mind to those views through meditative practice.
Oh yeah, that 아니 대주로 태산 채와 태천보 연구레스 가르레스 대대체나 아니다 태탐보 태산 예때나 배워 인장 퇴외 채는 세와 주로 세가나 최세와다 저와 아니 퇴비 퇴마 임바 봉세가나 아니 가서 퇴외 채는 퇴외 늘려 도바체 세가 추dun지라와다 아니 퇴외 퇴마 임바 봉세가나 아니 딩이지라와다 태양은 대와 톱세가나 아니 셔럽질라와 올라와서 못들 봐 신도 아니 가서를 제배 아니 텐션보다 땡그리 대다 제배 퇴섬제와 텐션보다 대신 안랑기 단조지 때라 님보 레발 넘바 임베 다 단조 통화데 아니 가서를 재미도 취세도 마서봐 님보 레바 임베 넘바 임베 추대라 베베 아니 년년도 차이
So thus, if we do like that, then when we engage in listening to this kind of treatise, this specific treatise, this work here, and we listen to that and we think about this. Now, listening to the teachings, which includes any kind of study of them, but specifically hearing them, is explained all over the place in many different texts, in the Abhidharma Kosha as well as in the sutras, that it's hearing the teachings is the basis for all three practices of the higher training in ethical discipline, because it's only by study and hearing and then studying what it is that one needs to abandon, what it is one needs to take up, that one can engage in ethical discipline properly. And then likewise, the same thing applies through meditative concentration and wisdom, the development of those trainings as well. So if we do that properly by hearing and thinking about these topics carefully, then it becomes extremely profitable as something that is of great benefit to us. And that is itself then the way in which we spend our lives, this kind of life that we've achieved now, which is a basis, foundation, which is endowed with the freedom to practice and the leisure or the freedom from all of the disadvantages that would prevent us from practicing, as well as the positive qualities that enable us to practice. So then if we spend this kind of life in this way, then we've taken the essence from this kind of life. And that being the case, then it's essential that we apply ourselves to this with this kind of practice with as much effort as we're able to do.
Oh yeah, that. Katari de la imbolamba yebe tudele baba nanden du chayis. O baba nanden du chawa tele shendu. Anita yebadan kutitang. 罗中节因那的，可以那样，我们节那的，对，你捏巴当、骨头当、茶巴当，其实我们团那捏巴给他，因为茶队给往着送那，你地中给列巴去生那些，你等到为地巴当东往给，你让一个给列巴去生呢，给列巴去生呢，你送那论证性概念呢，送那吃给没生巴当。 삼나 퇴면 미권바다 퇴면 미권바다 원나 줄라 미제베 아니 체크하고 퇴산을 배바 깨체장 아니 로랑가 위 저대바 체중당 아니 저些체중소 아니 저些체중소 아니 로좀 민사게 로좀 가야 미자바게 아니 신바 어디에 신바 랑가와 남장 체바 주사 매바 주에 주에 남로이 미바 마시도 마성와시 나 시와 바 텐텐도 시와 잠마인 바 로이 남로이 미바 마시도 마성바 남대랑 로이 곰네 로이 오게라 제바텔라 년년도 배고 그래
So then if we do otherwise, if we think about this in some other way that is not recognizing it as that study and reflection on these teachings, this kind of teaching is useful, and this applies to meditation as well. We can think that, by studying things or meditating on them, that we can get some possessions, we can gain respect, others' service of our serving us, we can get fame, then one's mind stream will be constantly ruined, impaired by these evil actions, vices, and the downfall of their vows. Thus, when if we do this in that way, and we try to memorize the teachings, we hear them, we're not able to retain the words in our minds. when we reflect upon them, we try to think about them, but we don't understand the meaning. And if we were to meditate upon them, then these topics of meditation are not produced within our mind streams. The realizations of the teachings would not appear within the mind. And then thus, if one does that in that way, even though they claim to have been striving to study and understand the Dharma for their whole lives, someone does that, in fact, then their minds will actually just most of the time be no different in terms of their renunciation and the way in which their minds are operating than the mind that an ordinary person, for example, a farmer, operates. So that mind will just be like that. And not simply taking the path as an object of their minds. So here, this is referring then to one doesn't think of the path as just something to look at, as an object to observe, but rather it's something that one should make a great deal of effort to produce that within one's own mind, to generate it as the very character or nature of one's own mind.
Oh yeah, that is 안에 탈랑그 메딘쇼 남지 메딘쇼 가상 얘게 시와 어디서 탈람지 메딘쇼 산다게 탈람도 따위 치지로 에 손에 아니 대다 안에 로면 고비 긴장다 타바다 탐제지만 도시르비 수대다 다 원에 시작이 손 맞대 봐 대세세 나니와 연락을 전라 안에 다도 신이다 남자자와 고랑 그 흉고 된다더라 지도에 시에네 다 연락을 전라 안에 대시샤바 동아지 때봐 군준대봐 고비대봐 남지대봐 샤바 또 son거를.
So now then, so the text here has identified the four paths that are erroneously imagined to be paths to liberation by others, and which are the opposing factors to the actual path to liberation. So he's done that already in the 16 aspects of the four truths which are understood in a distorted, contrary way. Then the master here will explain the reasons which reject or refute those wrong ideas, and the way of establishing properly liberation and omniscience through objectively impelled reasoning or reasoning inference, which operates through the force of facts, things that are established as facts. And then then this leads into the next major subdivision of the text, which is the meaning of the limbs here, the different parts of the Four Noble Truths. If you take the Four Noble Truths in toto, then the four parts of them are suffering, origin, cessation, and path. The four, and these will be presented sequentially.
아니 셰바라 동아대바 군중 셰바 시유베나네 다 담보 동아대라 동아대바 그 천시 두바다 천시 셰바 아니 천시 두바다라 코통에 바다 타마여바 가바니 천이 다 담보 동아대바 산데 간데질에 시유아르서 왜 송와다라 아니 텔라 토마메 바 두바니 유베나네 나 동아대바 산나 사천일이 풍보대 알아죠. 내년주 왕그 총이 사장님이 풍부었어. 나 쉬우나라 세지가라 미다 동아 동 다메시 체바도 체베 아니 체베 아니 사제지지라 송거래. 인상 너나 사장님이 풍부. 내년주 왕그 총이 사장님이 풍부대. 다들 동아지 담바 인데 가르에서나 내년지 왕그 총이 코와쟁是吧？코와를 제지 풍부 인비체를 동아 코와 잼 풍부 어디 선거래 내년이 왕그 충이 내년이 왕고 코와를 제지 풍부 인비체를 코와 잼세 가는 아마네 띠용 내내 치마로 안는 저기是吧？원래 풍부 인비체 소진 좀 메시바 타스 이 가사대디니 가사 체디 아니 가서래 가사시 제가 치면 메셔봐 뒤뒤 제가 치면은 좀 메셔봐 다게서 소진 좀 메셔봐 다 치기 가사 제가 치면은 쉬나 치 가사디 제가 치면은 쉬나 아니 따버려 좋아 따바 주라스 뒤까지 그 좋아를 마도 아니 치기 가사 고란다 가서 이제 와시마 여시고 말하는 아주라 따바 주라 스버치미 남시 당보 코랍니다 다 제와치마 그 남시 당보 대야 코와 탈그 말이 대가 말 강도야 맞아 말 매비시 말 강도야 맞지 비시 대나 코와 시와데 주나담라 마도 아니 주사자 요와 말에시 다 로도지 연구하래 야
Now then, so the truth of suffering has subdivisions of it. The first is proving the example of the truth of suffering, or illustrating and giving the basic character of it. And then the definition as such is given later. And the first has two topics, showing that samsara is beginningless, and then refuting the idea that samsara has a beginning. And the first of these, showing that samsara is beginningless, is the identification of suffering, and the reason to prove that proves that suffering is beginningless. So the identification of suffering is given here in the verse as suffering is the samsaric aggregates. The 5 appropriated aggregates, the aggregates which have been taken up by the force of karma and mental affliction, are the truth of suffering, because they are samsaric aggregates that are appropriated in samsara under the power of karma and mental affliction. So where it says that by the force of karma and mental affliction, the aggregates are things that cycle within samsara. The cycling with samsara here can be understood as referring to flowing or cycling through a process, and the aggregates cycle within samsara in that it's not that they come from nothing and then disappear. Rather, they come from a prior samsaric state and then they flow into or cycle into a subsequent samsaric state. So someone who does not know how to establish collections of things or continuums, that is, continuities of things, might say, well, a person who has just died and enters the next life will be permanent. So what this view is saying then is that although it's true that a person will go through life, when they die they enter into the next state and will be permanent in that state, not changing or transitory.
Oh yeah, that and the Kasa Tapa Kwa Dungadi, that on a Shabak Ribak Kaja or Timbari. Kasa Tapa Kwa Dena, Ani Tapa Lenny Castle, Kaji Jibal Meva Yinzang, Ani Takaji Zowa Chet, all I want to say. 다 되니다 가서를 토마메 봐 루비 루바 칸데레 살아텔라 토마메 비린다를 깨워 주봐 그봐 아니 라니 레이바 아니 주메도 깨워 가봐 미디미 줄에 깨워 가봐 요다 담보텔라 아니 토마메 비린다를 깨워 될라 칸데레 살아 다시 대자다 세단을 쏘와 세대로와 고민한 대자 소사와 통지 대자 님면데 규매제와 가치로 세워된 말에 대자다 세단을 쏘와 난 지지 대자다 세단을 쏘와 이날에 른장아망 오도 쏘와 대자 세단 간지나랑 른장아망 오도 쏘와 쏘와도 가르주고래 세나 랑이 콤발레 아니 코네 콘도 랑경 안게 차단 가상 아마 쉬와 나서 차단 가소래 배조 미고 와요. 마랑경 안게 깨데 가르레잖아. 아마 콤발레드네 지와이자. 그봐. 라니 콤발레 코네 콘도 랑경 안게 아니 치 사월이 지와. 치 사월 지와 통세를. 지와 정화 인상 과연장 아마 좀 어디도 그래. 아르 마콤발라 아니 콤바디 연구 말이 와인자 통세를.
Now then, so a person might say that, the person has died, they enter the next life, and they'll just stay in that state. And they might continue to say, it is unacceptable that the first cognition of the subsequent existence be samsara. That means that when they die, they would enter into some kind of permanent state, which is not samsara, because that cognition has never occurred before. Therefore, so-called samsara is merely a mistaken appearance, illusory mistaken appearance, and does not exist in the least. That's the wrong view, which is going to be rejected later. And then others assert a permanent person as samsara, and these are the chief objects of refutation for the reasons that will be given below. So the first of these is negating the idea that there's that samsara arises, that samsara has a sort of end to it by entering into a next life which is permanent, and we do that by proving that suffering is beginningless. The first part of that is proving that it arises beginningless from homogenes or things of the same type, and that's given at the bottom of page 352, where it says, attachment, anger, etc. are preceded by previous homogenes, things of the same sort, because we see that they arise naturally and with greater and greater intensity through their own accustomation. So what this is referring to when we observe moments of anger or attachment, these don't arise just without any kind of cause, but they occur from the force of our habituation or our conditioning. That is, our mind streams have been conditioned or habituated in the past to anger or attachment, and it's from those, that conditioning or accustomation, that the mind is sort of habituated to anger and attachment, and then those prior states of attachment and anger serve as the similar kind of cause, a cause which is similar to the effect here, and then the effect which arises is the current instance or experience of attachment and anger.
Oh yeah, that is the human job. Ani chadan teta, ani shen sula yang, ani madu ba jujian kan la yang madu ba de meji, ani deja ranga de chua yi mare se. De yin na de ma yin ba kare se ranga jiwi se, 是吧？ani jujian shen yang de meji deja de chua yi na, jujian la madu ba jiwa yin za tui da do jiwa kwa la. 提到的马街把人家接话印章，俺那现虽然呀，对面就大家都去年买的是，是吧？这个对了，你原本的接话搞不起来是这，要这吧？原本的接话搞不起来是，你以前原本的接话搞不起，但要那丢弃他。
Now then, so attachment and anger, etc., are not just accidental occurrences, these things something that would occur without cause, that are not dependent upon anything, because they occur only occasionally. It's not that one is constantly angry or constantly attached. Rather, attachment arises on certain occasions. Other occasions, anger arises. These things occur not sort of automatically or spontaneously. Rather, they depend upon something else. And this follows. It follows that reasoning is applicable here, because if they have no cause, it is contradictory that they would arise.
Oh yeah, that in the middle of Java, and long, Casa Juma, long Basila Java Gaya Tang, and the Juma Basila Java Gaya. That long Basila Java Gaya della, and the Tambola Junde, the same Maduba, Dotamba, that in Yonkudua, that Tambo della, that Carre Sana. 你们就话讲，初级路所缺马人是真白的，是吧？初级路所缺马人是，你他恰当毛说的看这几个话的是呢，那个拍干了对下汤，吃完了血当当，开始给了嘛，你看这说是呢，你弄了都没结束是呢。 Lundi Pagasum la Sada Masum to Jekala, Pagan la Desha, Chivala Shedan, Lula de Mujisena, Chaso, Lula Sova, Lula Sova, Ani, Mujitabu Maris. Maduba Carrer, Jesu Tondo Maduba Cheres, Jesu Maduba Carrer Sana, Casole, Pagan Shechewa Yena, Deja Shechewa Majapa. Chivala Shedan Shechewa Majapata. Lungle, the Mushechewa, you were the Majapa, Tayizan, Jesu Tondo Madu, Jesu Tondo True. Pagan Deja Chungla, Chua Pagan Jala, and Deja Chungla, Shedacha Tom Shedders.
Now then, someone might say that the next section is refuting the idea that attachment, anger, etc., arise from causes that are inappropriate, that is, that don't accord with their basic character. And this is, again, subdivided into multiple divisions. The rejecting the idea that anger, attachment, etc., arises from wind, the three humors, and then rejecting the idea that it arises only from the elements. So the first is the relationship between desire, attachment, and so forth. Desire, anger, and ignorance. Their correlation with the three humors of which will be given below. So first, there's a brief exposition of this, demonstration of this, that the mental afflictions don't have the characteristic of cause and effect with relationship to the humors, and then a more extensive explanation of this. And this begins on page 354 in the translation. So the opponent here is saying that attachment arises from phlegm. The phlegm, bile, and wind are the three humors that occur within the body. And so the opponent is saying that the three mental afflictions of attachment, anger, and ignorance arise from these and from the specific character of these three humors. The opponent says attachment arises from phlegm, anger from bile, and ignorance from wind. And then the reply to that is that it follows that attachment and so forth are not qualities that are the direct result of wind, etc., because the assertion of positive or negative concomitance is mistaken, meaning that there's not an invariable connection between these specific humors and the specific mental afflictions that are supposed to arise from them, because we see that a phlegmatic person, a person in which phlegm predominates, may have little attachment. They may not have the attachment which is supposed to be the outcome of having an excess of phlegm, and instead they might have a lot of anger.
Oh yeah, that's the land guy there. And the Kader is and a Kaderanshi Jimmy Jenas. Oh, Jimmy Jenas, that country and a Pagan, the Chachava, Tuashe, Pagana Tuashe, then Kaditago is and a Kade Pagana, Shedangi, you Chiwi Rashi Davis, Pagana, and Shedangi, you Chiwi Rashi Jeva Yinzang, and Shedan Pewa Yimbe, and it and Tawatubata who can you all marry, it's a land Jabatella. On a Casatella, Chiwati, one day, Ani Timiji, Casatella, Chiwi, one day, Tima Yimbaga, and a Takabota, and a Shasavata. Only Mamata, Losawa, so Shedan Tele, and a Shan Chi Mutunde, Tonribatas, Shedan Tedachunribatas, Teda Muji Chiwasawa, you said. Muji Chiwasawa, Yeda, Chivi, one day, and a Tima Imba, Santaga, Shaseta, Umadon, and Losawa, and a Tele, Shedan Tele, Chimoto, Tonribata, Tinguja Sawa, you said.
Now then the opponent here might come back and say, because the bile that causes anger, bile being the specific humor within the body that is supposed to produce anger, is naturally mixed with the phlegm in a phlegmatic person, anger increases, and there is no flaw in our assertion of, there's no flaw of a mistaken assertion of concomitance, meaning that our reasoning, which we've applied here above, is valid. And then the reply to that is, well then, why do you not also see, aside from that anger, that person's prematurely white hair, jaundice, perspiration, and mental clarity, other qualities that are the direct result of that bile? It follows that it would be reasonable to see them because the direct cause, bile, is fully present. So the opponent here is making the case that it's somehow the specific humor that produces anger is mixed in with the other humor, but that doesn't make sense because these other things that are supposed to arise from bile, the prematurely gray hair, jaundice, and so forth, are also qualities that are supposed to be a direct result of bile. And if the bile is present in those and is a causal factor producing those things, then it makes sense that they would appear and we don't see them.
Oh yeah, that's it. Young man, Gavin. Jimmy Jenna, Tuy, Telesia, Chimadon said, Chiva to soon give a tissue, Chiva to soon give a tissue, any Paganda Lungian, any to some Tijian, to some Jigres, and Anita, Chivada Paganda Lung Sumbode, Chanyambagi. 其中没把千年把给丢他们家那安尼对家当写当的家当毛什么的其中安尼其中从不他是其中从不他在这个我就从不我就从不下来是今天呢都是年娃贵用我这都是的年娃贵用我这个小马人把他是都是你话贵用我这就去买人把它对了，我都想把它不给我这个球员呢，我都想把它不你话这他回去。
Now the opponent can come back and say that bile, that particular humor generates all three poisons, and so accordingly do the other two humors, meaning that each of them individually has the power to produce all three of these mental afflictions: desire, hatred, and ignorance, attachment, hatred, and ignorance, anger, and ignorance. So the reply to that is that it would follow that all beings, all people who have the three humors in equal proportions will have an equal amount of attachment, etc., meaning that everyone would have the same amount of attachment because attachment's cause, that is these humors, is the same in all beings. Therefore it follows, and that's obviously not the case, therefore it follows that all three humors are not qualities that are the direct result of all three poisons are not qualities. All three poisons, meaning attachment, anger, ignorance, are not qualities that are the direct results of all the humors because of the consequential fault just explained, meaning that if it was the case that all three humors produced all three poisons, the desire, etc., in an equal amount, then everyone would have the same amount of all of these things, which is obviously not the case.
Oh yeah. 那真的，你就我咱们计划从讲，俺那几位手有个俺那手就没得把创办那些人是，对了，是吧？就我咱们计划人生从讲有个俺那手就说没什么特性都这样，就俺那看着来是那弄的把个什么从讲，他来进入我那台了，俺那家他们说写出去没什么被卷没见那是。 几位数其中这样，其中没被这帮阿达从把就把人把他几位数其中得了七百件一的，从其中的看着来是呢，他这个我一来那么大笔见头也把马人把，我就从把来结把人被切死，我就可能给看着这位数其中七八件，我一来就大件头也把马人把，从把他来结把一张，然后呢，我一来就大笔件也把没中啊。
Now then, the person might come back and attempt to argue that our position, there's no flaw in our position, since this case is like that of people's unequal body sizes, which result, even though people arise from equal causes, the elements. So here, a fallback position is that the material elements that make up the body are sort of a source of the person's body, and everyone has the four elements, but nevertheless there's variation in their body sizes. This doesn't make sense either. It follows from the previous objection, that is, that there's no difference in the amount of the humors. This could equally be applied to the case of that person's body size, because people's body sizes would arise as the same, they all have the same size bodies, because of the equality of the direct causes, meaning the elements there. Unless one considers the principal conditions, that's our own position here, the Buddhist position, is that the principal primary condition which gives rise to variation in changing the size, people having different body sizes, have to do with the previous karma that modify or change the body size that people have in subsequent lifetimes.
Oh yeah, that's it. 가서래 피트 미송에서 가나 아니 주 lunti 파게 숨당 아니 차당 모서와 피트 미송에 진짜 멤버한테 다 가르쳐 주고 그래서나 녀와 차소 대다 최제 차소 대다 lunti 소징 언제 말해서 lun단 쳐와다 파간서 언제 말해서 많이 봐 가르쳐서 lun라서 왜 째남 주 lun단 파간라서 왜 째남 아니 쳐봐도 패와 연나 아니 가서래 대우 아니 차소 대다 쳐봐도 패와 연나와 매그 차렸어 예 먼저 얘는 주콩 주패외 대우 대표와 지용고 그래서 놀라서 왜냐면 패쳐봐도 패와 연나야 뒤 대부 아니 가서래 차소 대다 쳐봐도 패와 매와랬어 매우 진짜 가르래서 파게 패네 류구나 파게 패와라 때네 류기 좀 냠나 아니 차바트바 통해서 아니 이제라 하산타와데 다들 랭가르스 마두데 치와페네 룬두베 셰당 계속시나 치와페와라 때네 아니 류동아지 돈데 아니 셰당 기위치세나 대탐제 다마 두바니 많이 바타서 내 탐제 주와 시당 내 탐제 주와의 시당제와 통해서 오늘 치와다 파간라 소와기 아니 최종그 주와라 때네 아니 가사를 아니라 아니 시당제와 통해 결국이 되고 통 아니 결국이 되고 타위체로서
Now then, so here, that was a brief explanation of this subject, and then there's an expansion of that explanation. And this is showing the reason why it is that the increase and decrease of the defilements or the mental afflictions don't correspond with increase and decrease of the humors. They're not, and that being the case, they can't exist in a causal relationship. So this is at the bottom of page 356 in the translation, sort of towards the bottom of page 222 in the Tibetan text. And it says, the faults of attachment, etc., are not the direct result of wind, bile, and phlegm, etc., because even if there is an increasing intensification in the faults of wind, etc., it is not certain that those faults will increasingly intensify, because we see that sometimes when phlegm has increased and the body weakened, attachment decreases in intensity. So thus we see cases where there's variation in the particular humors, and the corresponding the mental affliction or defilement which is supposedly the result of them, actually decreases when the humor increases that's supposed to give rise to them. So in the case of causality, if a cause increases in its force, then the effect which comes out of it necessarily is more powerful. It produces a greater effect. And the contrary is true as well, that if a cause decreases in its force, then the effect that comes out of it is less powerful as well. So that's because there's not the correspondence between the activity of the humors and the activity of the mental afflictions that are correlated, they're supposed to be correlated with them, we can say that it's clearly the case that there's not a direct causal relationship between the humors and the mental afflictions. Then the opponent could come back and say, the reason there is on page 358, the translation. The reason is unproven because when bile increases, then anger arises through the discomfort of the body. So they're kind of claiming that because of the humor operating in the way it does, the increase in bile, there's some stomach ache, discomfort in the body, and that produces anger. The reply to that is that it follows that it is not the case that the reason is unproven merely by that, because we see that by transformation of all the humors, there will be the arising of anger. So it follows that anger is the result of all the humors. Also, it follows that it is not the case that anger arises from all those humors because of the flaw in that the three humors should then have an equilibrium of anger, attachment, and ignorance. That is, that the three humors, if there was a direct correlation between their modification, then we would see the exact same kind of modification within all three of the directly resultant mental afflictions that arise from them, but that's not the case.
Oh yeah. That didn't say that the neck will almost give a mayan, but yes, you are Maris, the mayan bacares and Nesu Chanyan by Nayang, Tinella so Tanso Chanyan Balayang, Shena Tumba, and Tumba Tumbuki, said he done the neck will almost give a mayina, and Nesu Chanyan Bala, Shena Tumbuki, your race. That Kongi Chawa Duba the Carreras and I get Lundi so. Never chasso de Lundi Soji, when they're my Indi, Nula Chivin, Jan and Pewa, you're not Chen Pewa, you know, maybe Chidi, Pagampana Luke in the Tribatomic, Chawa Yudi, Majita, like Chawa Yowata, you Pagam Pewa, Juana, do the Jam, maybe young, Jubayam, Mirumichel. Pena Chiva Pena, Tawala Soviet, Pewa Shino. Ona teda ki ju khanye sana chaso ji juwa teda khare sana jungwa tamlang usi kyawa mare sa ona khare rangi chowa dedu le tene chaso teda rangi ju chowa dedu le tene rawa chowa dewa le tene deja ji chowa dungwa le tene shedan ji rangi chowa dedu le tene ji bse. Yeah.
Now then, so it follows that the previous basic reason pervades the predicate, because if there's an increase in the cause, phlegm, it is unsuitable that there be no increase or a decrease in the result, which is attachment. For example, when bile increases, the fever, etc., of a disease increase. So there's a kind of direct causality we can identify where the increase in the bile produces a symptom of disease, of fever, etc., and so there's an increase in that. And then the opponent might come back and say that, well, then what is the cause of those defilements or mental afflictions? And then the reply at the top of 359 is the transformation of attachment, etc., do not arise directly just from the elements, because they arise from the sensations of pleasure and pain that are their own cause. So this is giving the actual position, saying that now modification of the elements within the body and the the different humors and so forth which operate within the body can be cooperative conditions that is going to be explained later, but they're not the direct cause because of the reasons that have been given above. Because they arise from this, but attachment, etc., these changes in attachment, anger, ignorance, and so forth arise from sensations of pleasure and pain that are their direct cause. And then the opponent might come back and say, well, attachment is not generated in that way as it is blocked by the suffering sensation which arises from a disequilibrium among the three humors. This will come subsequently.
Oh, yeah. That is that Casore, Kade Nesu Chamayan Bala Kiwi Saw Duayan Kajik, that Duma, Shashana do Zero, Kade Nesu Chamayan Bala Kiwi Saw Duaji, Dejaji Christian. Nesu Chamayan Bala Saw Duaji, Dejaji Christian, Mijaba Yimbe, and Mijaba Yimbe, Lala. Anika Dejaji Gaji Simbe, Do Mijaba Tonga Zamji, Anika Sore, Dunde Jona, Hajan Talo Sena. Kajikilana. That deja Gase, one of deja chi Messi Chive, and in Nesu Chanyambala, Kua Pe, tell a deja, tell any deja Java in Sena.
Then, so the opponent might say, attachment is not generated in that way, as it is blocked by the suffering sensation arising from a disequilibrium among the three humors. If we only see the non-generation of a result because of the occasional presence of a contradictory condition, then there follows the extreme consequence that the relationship between cause and effect is undermined, cause and result is undermined. So that's their position there, fallback. And then the reply to that is, well then, in what by way of an answer we say, tell us then how is attachment generated? And their position then would, or one fallback position they would say is that attachment arises from an increase in semen, which arises from an equilibrium of the three humors. Here the word semen actually, as the note says to the text, is not specific to males, but is a kind of like a what we call a hormone, or some kind of a sexual fluid within the body.
Oh yeah, that's my. Nesu Chachim, Deja Nesu Chanyam Doba, Deja Church, Nesu Chanyambala, Kua Pepe, Tela Deja Sena, Deja Church, Nesu Chanyambala, Doba Truatas, Nesu Chanyambala, Doba the Truata, Gashi Nesu Chamiambala, and Deja Java Toviche. Chetela Jesu Jundu, and Jesu Jundu Truata, so to be shared of Dandamba Shani. Tesum Chanyam Naya, so to be head of Damba in Naya, Nesu Chanyana Yang, and Chatham was a Java member at Tomicher. Chukua Pevala, Doba Truata, Chajan Shani Kua Sana, Chata Jang, and Chikiwa Tomicher. Chajan Church, and Pimis, there, Jimmy, Chaba Chabajan, the Mijuata, Pimijuba, the Mena Kua Pivang, that they hope that you should at the Maho.
So there's a further discussion of this, but the reason that this doesn't obtain, that the argument here isn't valid, is because we see cases in which these sort of hormones within the body, or literally semen, are increase or decrease according to variation within the other kinds of biological elements or humors within the body, and but we don't see a direct correlation between the increase or decrease of these hormones and or the sexual fluids and attachment, anger, ignorance, and so forth. These don't exist, and we see cases of people who still have these fluids within their body, but they don't have any attachment or anger or ignorance because through meditation practice, the wisdom which understands the nature of reality, they're able to stop the arising of the various mental afflictions, attachment, and this doesn't necessarily need, doesn't even refer specifically to the wisdom understanding reality, but even ordinary kinds of meditation practice that understand the nature of things can stop the arising of attachment and so forth, even if these humors which produce these fluids within the body are in equilibrium. So, and then there's cases, further cases where there's no correlation between the case of someone who's lost blood and therefore doesn't have these kinds of fluids. They can still have attachment arising when they see an object which they consider desirable. So even if the body is weakened through some kind of accident or whatever, there's cases of attachment arising strongly in those people.
Oh yeah, that the much that didn't want that locomotive. That did that is such. That what they say in Tambala Java, Java, just in Tambala Java. Just in Tambala Java. The cheater do. She's in Tambala Java. And you are just in Tambala Java, you some you dance about your copy, River Shantambatella. 那些是什么来？广东下巴给查说能，安尼哦，那什么就按照一把国别是把听，是吧？哦，大家知道什么呢？他用估计去嘛意思都，查说那什么就按照一把国别是把地，也说呀。
那你么说？
有得多啊，就这个这都一点的。你把先生全部来讲吧，这里什么一点开发建议没有？不吧？
哦，对，
哦，那等嘞，查说那什么因为这一把国别是把地，查说就因为这几千年一把样搞的是，查说的他就往那个就因为这个千年一把样搞的，我得了结束他都出不起来是，哦。看说的就是说的出个些人生，就是查说的出生那位这样嘛样的，就是的查说，按照出生那位这样嘛样的，按呢就是原本他来是告诉告诉不起，就是有啊原本他来查说要把跟我没有一张，原本他来是告诉告诉不起的，啊，那咱你话你什么一点想法就过别人不得了。 你大概看说的，哦，别搞把它全国把你以为那样的地方就这样哦。
So then we'll skip over some of the reasonings that are given in the about the relation between the elements to page 363 of the translation at the top, and this is on still on page 224 of the Tibetan text. And so here it's showing a summation of showing that the mental afflictions don't arise from the elements that make up the body alone, and then following that will be showing that a refutation of the idea that the body is the special basis of the mind. So first at the top of 363, the reasoning that refutes the idea that attachment, etc., are the direct result of the three humors also refutes the idea that attachment, etc., have the nature of being the direct result of the elements. So you can apply the same reasoning to both sorts of arguments. Because it is proven that in the latter case, the assertion of positive and negative concomitance is mistaken. It is also the case, not the case, that those four elements are the basis of the abiding continuation of an already existing attachment, because that has already been refuted, where it says whether substances are existent or non-existent, there is no basis substantially different from them. So this has been given up above, and then next comes the explanation of showing reasonings that refute the idea that the body is the special basis of the mind.
Oh yeah, that is a big about that. 设计究竟 아니 중주 중원을 때마开朗바 신도세 아니 차소장 아니 중원을 땡고래 때마인데 현도나 아니 체라라야 아니开朗가와 그게 와래 세나开朗다 가와 주로 세나 다 가볼라서 중주 그래서 가도 가볼라서 사소 중원出现내 사소 중원라出现내出기 때문에 말해서 중원라出现내出기 때문에 말해 아니 중주단 중원이 오데确全线一不切的事全线一不切的这个代表些比这种看的这种样缺陷去年超把几个电对大瓦堂中华党军部究竟有问题去年把超把几个电对电瓦堂아니 남의 집이 거나 때도 때마 인지 개라 현도出现내 왜 때도 타바 많이 받아 중앙함이 귀태남 되냠도 아니 중앙함이 귀태남 양나 되냠 bar 초바 예매 받내위 실 랑도 때도 따와 임세 따와서 임세
Now then, we'll shift over to refutation of the idea that the body is a special basis of the mind. The first of that is showing an example and argument based upon that, which is it's on page 364 of the translation. And the opponent here would say, just as you accept that secondary qualities are based upon the elements, this refers to things which derive from the elements like color and so forth, the four elements being fire, water, wind, and air, and then the secondary qualities are things like color, visible form, and so forth, shape and taste and so forth. So you must accept that attachment is based upon the elements. Otherwise there will be a contradiction in what you accept, your own position. So then the reply to that is the secondary qualities of whiteness, etc., are not based on earth and other already existent and abiding elements because they are objectively separate from the elements. Also, it follows that the meaning of the phrase explained as based upon the elements is that in a single simultaneous collection, what abides together is merely designated as the basis. It is taught as the basis by way of its previous generation. Something substantially other that already exists and abides with it cannot be accepted as the real basis because either the previous elements are meant as the cooperative cause or alternatively the elements are simultaneous. They are merely designated as whiteness's own basis because they abide inseparably in a single simultaneous collection. And because of that, something other than these cannot be accepted as its basis. So basically it's saying then that something like the material elements of a thing and its whiteness, if it's a white thing, white and the material elements that in terms of a single event of whiteness and the object which is white, the material elements underlying it and whiteness exist simultaneously, therefore they can't be cause and effect. That is, some prior instance of the thing could serve as a basis for the whiteness of the current thing, but the current thing couldn't serve as the basis in a causal sense for the current whiteness of the thing.
다 들리야 같이 되게 가르쳐서나 창다 창그 뉴와라 싸와 아니 전신 기단的담보 인바提醒도스 창다 창그 뉴바데 차소장 아니 중화라 예와 예비 추지 아니 담바레스나 다 되라 차소 아니 중화라 가서 야나 초바 예매지 때인데 담바 민주대 아니 창단 뒤니와 예와 예배지 땜바 인노 스체네다 같이 되라가 초바 예매지 때인데 담바 민주대 창단 뒤니와 예와 예배지 때인데 담바 인노잖아 창경 오래 아니 창조 예위 니와니 오데 퇴신 신마인 바다 퇴신이 마인 바다스 창경 오래 뒤니와니 퇴신이 마인 바다 창단 창경 니와니 보데 전이 주대 좋았더니 아니 집어서 주대세시 며칠 창단 니와니 보데 주대 자지 마이나 아니 창차를 주위체나 창대 차를 주위지 창근오 지발 좋았다. 창차를 주위 창근오 지발다. 아니 창차를 주위지 창근 예유니와의 지부체라서. 라 창근 주대에 대단 많이나 창차를 주위지 창근오 지발 좋았다. 디 창대기 아니 인여와 지위니와의 지부체라. Now then,
the opponent could come back then and say, just as to give another example to establish their view, just as liquor in its capacity to intoxicate, etc., are objectively separate, basis and based, so that's their claim, so also attachment, etc., are based on separately existing elements. So they're saying that just as liquor and the capacity to intoxicate are separate qualities or separate things, basis and based, then attachment, etc., are based upon elements which are different, substantially different things. Alternatively, there can be no basis and based where there is only an inseparable collection. Liquor and its intoxicating power are a basis that exists separately. So that's their position laid out. And then the reply to that, it follows that the capacity to intoxicate is not objectively separate from the liquor entity, the alcohol, the liquid itself, because these two exist as substantially identical. That is, they're substantially the same thing. Since that is the case, it follows that when liquor is heated, the liquor entity is destroyed because its capacity to intoxicate has been destroyed. When the basis, the liquor, remains hot, it follows that the base, the capacity to intoxicate, will be destroyed and would not return.
Oh yeah, that's in it. Law my battle. China Changin New Shindu, Jusum, Jumata Semni and Zeta Tumba Resena, that Dima Tumba Mares, Jusum Jeta, but the Jumata Semni was the Zeta by Imba Resena, Ani Lomadruala Sosonawa. Lomadruala, Ani Sosor Menawa Zechi, but Lomadruala Sosonawa Zetaki, Tensaguaita, Lomadruala now Tadabacha Tobichel. Loma Jubara Nava Tata Bakari Tongre and Jumati, Regina Bachan. Ani Casore, Towata Wina, Towa Sibi Nabajana Sova. Anis Loma Jubara Sosana in Beres.
Now then, the opponent may come back and say that the elements and the mind equally are substantially different in the same way as liquor in its intoxicating power. So the fallback position is like that. And then the reply to that is, it follows that the cases are not the same because the elements and the mind are substantially different. This is the basic position here, is that the material elements of the body and so forth, and mind, cognition, consciousness and so forth are substantially different. This follows because they are cognized by an unmistaken mind as having different appearances. That is, they appear differently to a mind which is not in error, because they appear respectively as having the aspect of a tangible element, meaning like a physical thing which one can touch and so forth, or having the aspect of a pleasant sensation, etc. So, for example, in the case of sensations we experience, they have that pleasant feeling, sensation, and then which appears to the mind differently from the elements, the physical elements which are tangible.
Oh yeah, that's it. 其实旅行对经济派度一路到把跟我那把出把就话他是旅行对就话可能一路到把天，到不我天那把出把就个来是，你一路到把的到把康熙，在那大些开发经济国呢，那么起的是，大经济忘了在那不起。 수소 중주로 주위에서 패드쳐만 하시세 중앙 수라 소비 중주에 대다 아니 주위에서 패드쳐만 하시래세 와 중앙을 할 때는 아니 중주 패드쳐봐 대라더니 대라 아니 양 가서 가라 미견게 왕게 나바션도 주아래세 일로 리션도 주지 일로 또 바나바션도 주아데 리지 주지 왕게 말에 미견게 왕게 나바션도 주아래세나 아니 다 나바토바테니 체제에서 미견지 순대지 상황제 강래장 미다바사다 미견당 이거지 미견세데 순대라 고진 바래 와 나바토바세데 미견기 샤도 주와세데 나바토바테 순대당 미견이 올때 쳐봐요 와래 와 순대전지 시와텔라 만두이 시와 용거와 라 순대전지 시와텔라 만두이 시와 용거와 랑당 주인공 마도와 송화 제자 현지에서 요진 내주당 틈바를 아니 가서 요진 내주당 틈바를 아니 로제와데 요 수랑기 아니 수지 내주당 틈바 순정 미식제바 쳐봐 인상 순정 미식 수지 아니 송대래 순정 안병 것은 로제를 만두어 시와체 와 대체 순정 또 봐라 아니 순정 매바建议바체 순정要买的是어디 미제 유메다도 제바시에 와래 미제지 왕가 나바 현도 좋아 인로체나 나바 도바 테니 송대제지 상황이 간래 이제 말이 다 자서 미제다 송대 지바시에 왕시나 송대제지 상황이 간래 이제 미다바다 tenji zam nawa tuje soji cheche vecher soji tenji nawa tuje cheche vecher.
So then the opponent may come back and say that the mind's aspect is transformed, changed, modified by the power or force of an objective condition, meaning the object that it's observing, cognizing here. So then the reply to that is that it follows that it cannot in any way be accepted that conceptual thought is under the control of some external object, because it arises through the appearance of a mere generic image, or I would translate this as concept. That is, the actual object of thought is concepts, not the external object as such, because the external object as such is cognized through sensory perception, and then a sort of representation of that appears as the concept, which is the direct object, or the object which is cognized by thought. So this position of the opponent here doesn't apply, because thought it cannot be in any way accepted that thought is dominated by or completely controlled by the external objects, because thought arises from the appearance of simply through the appearance of the generic image or concepts that are its direct objects, not the external objects, which are things outside of the mind, which are apprehended by perception and so forth.
Oh yeah, that's quite so. 전진나와 장인 배치 대나 류단 셈녀고 대단한데바 켜바견도 미루와 이선녀고 대단한데바 켜바견도 미루와 강거지 중위 류를 떠오면 매바도 가려서 중위 류를 떠와 매봐요 시왕아마 가시래 아니 심마 가시 중세 이로 떠봐 치 수소라 마대바 치리 아니 류당 아니 수소라 아니 마대바 이 아니 이롱아마게 아 치마게 아니 두스페체 렌디 예행그 최천에 껴와요 인상但참 중앙류를 떠오면 시왕아마 가시래 치마 가시 주시 이로 떠바아마 가시래 이로 치마 떠바 껴봐 치 이게 수소당 류를 써라 마대바 텐데 껴와요 인상 리슴 땡단데 켜바전도 무용하데 대세 말에 중앙예대 tel라 떠와 매바 시왕아마 가시 치마가 아마 가시 치마 가시 그 바자 세비 줄라 바사 세비 티 바자 세비 주지 주주와티 주전티 세레세.
Now then, therefore, because of that, that reasoning, body and mind are unsuitable to be a special basis and based, meaning that the body can't be the specific base for the mind in a causal sense, that it can't be the thing that produces mind in that way. Any later cognition originates from some previous cognition without ever depending upon the body made of elements, meaning that it can't have the body made of elements, which are the physical elements of the body, because without ever depending upon it, some subsequent cognition thus will have as its cause the awakening of the propensity left by some previous cognition. Meaning, so there, what that's basically saying is that body and mind don't function as a basis, a causal support for the arising of mind, which is then based upon it, because the way in which cognition operates is that it arises through the awakening of a propensity, some causal force, which was established within the stream of mind previously by some prior cognition, functioning as its basic cause. The body and mind interact again, as we've said, but there's not that causal relationship such that body serves as the principal or primary cause producing mind. Rather, mind has as its primary cause some prior cognition which left a propensity within the mind stream that then is awakened or activated. One could say the activation of that propensity is what produces the subsequent cognition or mental event. Stop.
Maybe any duty gaba tang da ko toma yoba dube the dile so.
So we've arrived at the subdivision showing that samsara, rejecting the idea that samsara has a beginning, and that's a new topic, so we'll stop there for the time.